The big thing to remember too is you can't get pigeonholed in wanting to get that guy out right away. I know this door is blown open, but if there is crush in there and we go to open that door before we do any kind of load capture, we'll continue crushing that cab because that door is our strong back. Does that make sense? So as much as we want to get into that person, we have to capture that draw. Richard is really nervous about this, and I get it. We go a little bit more on an angle, right? Things to think about: the difference between stabilization and catchment, right? We want to have this set up at the angle we had it set up at because we want to stop the crush on this vehicle. So and then it's going to be our catchment system. If we wanted to have stabilization, Dan, we could go wider footprint, and that's helping the side-to-side movement. But what we want to do here is stop this vertical drop, and that's why we're in the angle that we're in, and it sets us up for a perfect catchment system on the airbag doing the lift. If we were super nervous about that location, we could try to put a chain in, but the concern is that this is tapered and that it can slide, right? So a good point that Dan had pointed out earlier, part of the 360 that we have to do is because this thing is hanging off of tires that we wedged, which is perfect. Just double check when you're doing your 360 that the axles aren't compromised, because then that changes stuff. We may have to put a grip set in underneath here to stop that crush, right?
How would the axle be compromised?
Through the rollover, they could have grabbed something and ripped apart.
Ripped apart the frame itself?
Yeah, so if like bolts are sheared, welds are broke, I would put grip stacks in between the tires, drift a wedge in there, just for our safety, right? But if it's down and you can get wedges under the rims, we'll do what we did.
So what we did here for our 9-column airbag lift, because we had to put wedges at the top to match the angle of the surface we're lifting, if we were at all concerned that your crib stack could start to slide out if it's on pressure based off the angle, even though this angle is quite shallow, it still is a slight potential, especially if you go to a larger wedge. The way to mitigate that, if possible, is you add a second 4x6 beside your crib stack at the base layer, marry it up tight, and you can take two of the pins, pin it close, and essentially it marries it to ground and stops any backward pressure and have it sliding out.
Okay. The top wouldn't slide out versus the bottom?
Not likely.
Okay.
Typically, if you've aired up your system correctly,
okay,
a lot of the weight is going to be at the point of contact, so it should be pushing the weight down the middle of the column.
Okay.
If you were going to larger wedges, you can either have the wedges up at the top or after your first solid layer. That's when you really could be concerned about it sliding. Once it's received pressure from the bags, it wants to stay as a unit. You're concerned about the unit itself wanting to slide. So that's where you'll add an extra block. You could potentially do it without this block, but then you risk striking your crib stack with your dead blow hammer. So it's just a safer, better practice to add an extra block to give you a little bit of spacing, and you can get good strikes.
And then the strap underneath the crib stack.
So the strap was used. This crib stack was assembled a away from the trailer
Okay.
prior to initial stabilization being put in place. So we used the ratchet strut, built our crib stacker 9 column with a solid base up, got approximately to the height we assumed,
I see.
roughly measured of what we would need, strapped it,
So
dug
it
it
just
into
slid it in.
place.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it enables you to spend less time into a potential load zone.
Gotcha.
Allows you to get close, slide it into place. At that point, we just have to add the wedges.
Yep.
And then you can release the strap. The strap, when we slid it in, was the buckles were in a bad position.
Okay.
So once it was in, we just released the strap.
Okay.
Just allows you to move things in a lot quicker and less time underneath the potential load.
Perfect.
Well, we're pretty safe with our catchment system. It should be bomb proof. We had guys underneath there setting the crib stack up.
Yes.
Everybody saw how Dan and Chris set that crib stack up. They made a crib stack. They strapped it and drug it under. So something to think about if you're short of manpower. You weren't able to set a Paratech up. If you wanted to stop crush, you could set your box up, throw your strap underneath, and then Dan can go on the other side and Dan can drag it under, and then you can just slam a wedge underneath it on top of that crib stack if you weren't able to use Paratech. So it's a great system on how to set that up, and then they set that up in one shot and they weren't underneath the trailer for more than 2 minutes after we caught catchment. We don't have the manpower to have guys shutting bags off underneath the load. We have to manage it here. If Graham ran this call in the city today and we had 3 engines of rescue there, I would put the valves on the bags because we have the manpower for that. So it's a command decision, but when we come down to 3 people or 4 people on the call, right, Dan and Scott, the valves should be on the benefit to having them on the bag. If you have a line malfunction, you can keep air in the bag.
Going by what we see here now, why wouldn't we just tie these 2 Paratechs together?
Because one Paratech is only overcoming the air in the system. If we were to tie that Paratech into that Paratech, our pivot point becomes 6 feet in the air. So the Paratechs on the other side are just for the safety of the possible tip. We would never take this that far in the air, but it's just good practice to get into stabilizing the other side of the load for the what if factor. So if this load rolled over on a taller vehicle and it was actually more of a 45-degree angle or a 60-degree angle, you may get load shifted tip, and then that's what those other Paratechs are for, right? But if you were to lock them in, it's going to be slammed up into that frame and it's super tight. Excellent work, guys. We tied back with a chain for the what if, which is really good. If we were really concerned about weight, the guys captured that crib stack in a 9-post column. So on a 9-post column on a 4x4, what can we go to 4 posts? So we can carry 40, which is good. Air valve we need compared to what we're setting up for our chase system, because we have 4 Ys, right? So you got to put that in your calculation when you're setting your Paratechs up. So we could have done a double if we were concerned about it, but I wasn't concerned about it. And then we set up a great catchment system here, airbag system right beside it. Sod was chasing the load there, Paul was chasing the load here. We had guys on the other side setting up the pressure down. Dan talked to me about the shut off valve being on the airbag versus being here. And this is getting back to what I was